Welcome to today's episode of Unthinkable, a podcast about the aftermath of incidents causing catastrophic injury or death, the experts who are called to serve when these accidents occur, and lessons that we can all learn and implement in our own personal lives. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, kylebachus.com. Now here's the host of the Unthinkable podcast, Kyle Bachus.
Hey everybody, it's Kyle Bachus here again. Just again a reminder of what we do on our show. I'm Kyle Bachus. I'm a lawyer, been representing people, families involved in catastrophic injury and wrongful death cases for, going on about 30 years. And about 4.5 years ago now, here I'd spent my whole life representing families, and my own mother was killed when she was run over by a commercial truck. And that really put me in a unique situation. It was an awful tragedy for our family, of course, but it put me in a position where not only have I represented families in this setting for so many years, but I've personally experienced it, and I know the questions that families have. And so this podcast is really created so that to give people a behind the scene look at what happens in the investigations that are undertaken and the various roles that the experts who are called in after a catastrophic injury or wrongful death occur to help solve the puzzle, solve the problems. And I have with me today, just a tremendous asset to my firm and to many others around the Denver metropolitan area and the country, Ryan Ross. And Ryan Ross is a private investigator, and Ryan has been working for 20 years, and I think our relationship goes back that far as well, helping trial lawyers investigate and individuals investigate the difficult entanglements that occur after a catastrophic loss or injury. And so, Ryan, first of all, thank you very much for your time. I know how busy you are, and I truly appreciate your willingness to come on today.
This is such an important topic, Kyle, because people don't think they're going to find themselves in the situation where they're dealing with something unthinkable until all of a sudden there they are. So any guidance that you can offer them, I'm quite certain is going to be tremendously appreciated.
Well, it's so true, that one day you're just rolling along and everything's fine, and then you get the call that nobody wants to get, and you are in a position where you need folks like you. And so before we get into what you do, and we can talk to the audience just what a fascinating world you live in. Can you just tell us a little bit about your background? First of all, you're a private investigator. What does that mean? And how do you get involved in that as a business to begin with?
It means that I collect evidence on behalf of clients who are in a position where they need to prove some aspect of a claim that they intend to pursue, usually stemming from an injury of some sort. I got into this work, Kyle, because I used to be an investigative newspaper reporter, and the skill set is very similar. As a newspaper reporter, I was digging information up for publication in a newspaper. Now I'm digging information up for the benefit of my clients as they pursue a claim, usually stemming from an ugly incident in which they were injured.
So from a background perspective, from an educational perspective, to become a private investigator, is there a certain journalism kind of background, or just tell us, how do you find yourself in this position?
First of all, there is no degree required, nor is there any license issued in Colorado. In most other states, you do need to get a license. But even then, there's no specific educational requirement. The most common avenues to becoming a private investigator are journalism or law enforcement. But as a practical matter, you can come from any background. Kyle, I'd say it's more important that you have the skill set than the background. And the skill set is number one, you have to have an innate and sincere curiosity about the world around us, about people, about events, about circumstances, about facts. And number two, you have to be an indefatigable researcher. That curiosity, that genuine curiosity must drive you to want to know the answers to the questions that your clients need. And if you have that curiosity and you're a good researcher and know how to dig information up, including information that no one else wants you to have, then you've got the good foundation to begin a good private investigator.
So if I weren't in my industry, right, I think I would think of a private investigator as somebody you hire to go investigate, um, you know, if somebody's cheating on you in a relationship, or maybe private investigator go locate somebody. Um, Magnum PI, think about driving up Ferrari or something, and you're running around solving the world's problems. Um, what's the reality of how a private investigator spends their days? And then I want to talk to you about, after that, I want to get into how you work in cases after a catastrophic injury or death. But just generally speaking, I think it's fascinating. You know, in a lot of people's minds say, well, that might be a pretty cool job. What are you, private investigator? That sounds cool. What is that? What's your day to day?
Well, first of all, Kyle, I don't have a Ferrari yet, but I'm going to make a note to myself. That's something to add to my to-do list. Describing a typical day is difficult, Kyle, because one of the things that is common to private investigator work, and one of the things I like the most about it, is the incredible variety. And there's no way of knowing day to day what case you're going to be working on, or what information you're going to need, or how you're going to get it. I would just say, broadly speaking, it's a combination of desk work. There is some information that's available online, and you can use that to create a foundation to identify the other things you need, the people you need to talk to, and the records you need to get. So that's another way of defining it, Kyle. There's three parts to the job. One is identifying the records you need, figuring out how to get them. Two is identifying the people you need to speak to, where they are, what's going to motivate them, how you're going to reach them, whether you're going to do it by phone, email, or in person. And then the third and final part is writing a report. And at my company, as you know, Kyle, we take a great deal of pride in writing reports that are clear, concise, easy to understand, even when they involve complex subjects, so that my firm's clients, Kyle Bachus and the others, are able to get their hands on my firm's report and give it as much time as they can to assimilate, understand, and digest it, so we make it as easy as possible on them by making sure that the writing and that the records that we provided are easy to access and easy to read.
So one of the interesting things to me is, I think some people expect that if the police are investigating an accident, you don't need a private investigator because you have the police report. And I explain to clients that we really are, in a lot of cases, looking for different items from different angles, where the police are asking themselves, is there a criminal charge to be brought based upon what happened? We may be looking in a much deeper and different route. And I know you know that, but can you explain, uh, you know, your feelings about how you take over an investigation for a family is different than what the police are doing?
Well, the answer, Kyle, is that the police report is a starting point. We're certainly going to try to get it as soon as we can because it's going to guide our work. But for the reasons that you've already touched on, the police report is only a starting point. And the officer who investigated the accident has a completely different assignment and different viewpoint from what my firm has and what my firm's clients like you have. The biggest difference between, as you've already noted, between criminal action and civil liability. The other difference that comes up often is that the police officer, overworked, underpaid, underappreciated, has other matters to tend to, which in their world are often more important than your accident right here. So they don't have the time to devote to the investigation that someone in my line of work does. We're not faced with deadlines. We don't have the immediate need to figure out what to do with the injured people or the vehicles that have been damaged. We can take a broader perspective, try harder to find the witnesses who saw what happened. Just to give you an example, Kyle, to remind you of something that you well know, often police officers investigating an accident don't have the time or the inclination to speak to the 911 callers who called in the accident because they figure they don't have the need. Maybe the responsible person is clear to them. But in my line of work, 911 callers are a godsend because they are often the first ones to have seen the accident and they saw the involved vehicles before the collision, and they're independent in the sense they're not connected to any of those involved. So, wow, there's a wealth of information from them. And so that's something that we can develop that the police officer often does not.
So that's a great example, Ryan, because when you think about 911 calls, I think a lot of people don't even realize that that's an available record to go after. And also, it's my understanding, you probably know better, at some point they may be recorded over or they may disappear. And so there's a window of time to access that important information. And I think a lot of people will be surprised. They think that, well, of course, the police officer doing a crash investigation must have heard those 911 calls or be listening to them, but that's not the case at all, is it?
No, it isn't. And, Kyle, that prompts me to underscore one of the points that I wanted to share with you when I thought about this podcast, which is that amongst all of the other things working against the injured person, one of the things that undermines their ability to recover is time. Time is their enemy. Here they are having to deal with their medical problems and their family and their job and all the tumult that this accident has created in their life. And they lose track of the fact that every day that passes, their ability to hold those who've caused this accident accountable is undermined. I thought of that as you referenced these 911 calls. You are absolutely correct that as a general rule, they are there sometimes for only as short as 30 days, sometimes up to 9 months if you're lucky, or 6 months or 9 months, but you shouldn't count on that, which is why it's hard to say this, but when you've been seriously involved in an accident, one of the things you're going to have to do as soon as you can is get the professional help you need. Don't do it yourself. Listen to your doctors, but as quickly as you can, get legal help and get investigative help, because every minute that clicks past is going to make it harder for you to collect the information you need to hold accountable those who caused this crash.
Yeah, and in the big picture, fault matters in a huge way. Most states, I'll give you and I know you're aware of this, but I'll give the listeners the name. Modified comparative negligence is the big word. The real way to think about that is kind of 50-50 and you're out. So we have to be able to prove when a crash occurs that our client is less than 50% at fault for causing the crash, or they can't make a claim. Most states, in the United States now operate with this same rule, this kind of 50-50 and you're out rule. So we have to demonstrate who's at fault. And then the other thing that the rule does is that if you are, if the other driver's 100% at fault, then they owe you 100% of your damages. If they're only 75% at fault, they only owe you 75% of your damages. And so this scale of fault is huge, and people like you can come in and through an example that you just gave with respect to the 911 calls, a police officer may have talked to two witnesses, but there's two others who can tell a completely different version of what occurred, who called 911 and were in the best position. The police never spoke to them. And you're going out and getting that information that the police are not involving themselves with in a lot of their investigations. It's fascinating.
And, Kyle, if I may, can I ask you, what percentage of the people who approach you for help are surprised when you tell them that they have the burden of proof?
Right. You would think, hey, I'm a victim. This happened to me. What do you mean I've got the burden of proof? But yet that's exactly the way that it works. The victim has to prove the fault on the part of the person that they want to bring the claim against, who caused all of this misery to their life. And so, yeah, it is. It's an interesting. Yeah, it doesn't seem fair, but you got to have somebody who's going beyond the police investigation. I can't tell you how many times that the police, and like you said, doing their job, overworked, etc., we find something through a private investigator that's important to our investigation, important to our case to be able to meet that burden of proof that you just talked about. And let me ask you about another issue, because I think it's another overlooked aspect. So let's say that there's a trucking company and the driver falls asleep and causes a crash, and we're going to bring the claim, and the police are looking at that from the perspective of, what do I charge the driver with? Whereas we might be looking at it as, why did this company hire this driver? What's this company's background record with respect to these drivers? Is this an isolated situation, or is it a systemic problem? And can you speak to how you work in that area and how important it is to the civil case?
There are layers of liable parties, one hidden beneath the next. So the driver is the one that's most apparent and easy to identify. But to build on the point you've just made, Kyle, behind that driver is the company that hired that driver. And then there's the company that hired this trucking company to transport that load. And then there's often a company called the broker in between the trucking company and the company that needed to ship these goods. And an investigation into a truck crash in particular should be comprehensive enough to identify all of those layers of liable parties and determine what the nature of their liability is for what happened. Because, when you're injured, as you know, Kyle, sorry to tell you things obvious that you well know, when you're injured by a semi-truck, the odds are that you need and you deserve every dime of compensation you get to help you carry forward with the rest of your life. And that means identifying not just the driver of that truck, but everybody behind him. In some cases, they all share liability for what happened to you, and they all need to be identified, and their liability all needs to be investigated.
Yeah, the average private passenger vehicle weighs something like 4,000 pounds, and the average fully loaded semi-truck weighs close to 80,000 pounds. And you're right, Ryan, when there's a collision between those two vehicles, we know who's going to win and who's going to lose just by mass and size. And that's why there are rules that these companies have to abide by, supposedly, when they're going to put professional drivers out on the roadway and interacting with private passenger vehicles and our families and yours. And so this accountability, the police investigation, almost all of the time ends with the driver, right? Was the driver speeding? Did the driver fall asleep? Did the driver do something wrong? But you and I know that's the starting point for our investigation. And the role that you play is to go out and find all of these different layers of information. And how do you go about the business when when a lawyer calls you and we say, hey, there's an accident and it involved this trucking company? And then can you talk about the work that you do to conduct that investigation, to come back with the material that lets us know, is there a negligent hiring, training, supervision? Is there a systemic problem with the company?
Sure, Kyle, you start at the scene, get as much information as you can about what happened at the scene, the 911 calls. You're going to take photos. You're going to get photos that law enforcement took. You're going to interview the witnesses. And then hopefully, if the police officer has done his job, you're going to get some indication, at least on who hired the driver to drive that truck. And then you're going to get some federal records pertaining to the company that hired this driver driving that truck. And then there may be other records that give you insight into who the background of that truck driver, the background of that trucking company, and the company that hired that trucking company to ship these goods, and the company that acted as the broker. In general terms, Kyle, I would just say that this is like unpeeling an onion. You've got a layer, this layer here, there's another layer there, then you get a hint. Oh, there's this name of this company in Houston, Texas that appears on this document. So that's another layer of the onion that you have to unpeel. And you're doing a lot of unpeeling on this onion because you want to make sure that you are able to identify all of the liable parties, no matter how far you have to unpeel that onion to identify them.
Well, and I see you're able to go out and present information regarding how many crashes has this company been involved with its drivers, how big or how small is the company, what are the assets potentially of the company, which is all such useful information to our ability to hold these companies accountable, because they want to pretend like this is just an accident, stuff happens. But usually the information that we're able to get for families is much more robust to show, hey, you want to know why this happened? This happened because this company has a history of not putting safety first, right? And that's a huge thing to uncover.
Accidents happen for a reason, Kyle. I don't need to tell you that, but I do think it's a point worth making to your listeners and anyone else involved in a crash like that. Accidents happen for a reason, and that's one reason why I think the Colorado State Patrol was very wise a few years ago when it stopped saying that it was investigating accidents. The word accident makes it sound as though inherently there's no one to be held responsible for what happened. In fact, there most often is. And so rather than calling it an accident, they started calling them crashes. And that's what these are, traffic crashes. And a crash, more likely than an incident and then an accident, contains the kernel of the inquiry here. What caused this crash? Who was responsible for it? I prefer crashes to the word accidents.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a great point. And one of the reasons that this finding out why it happened, not just what happened, is so important is when you're a victim, like when my family was victimized and my mother was killed, my brother and my sister, you want some control, some level of control over the unthinkable, and you want to know, how in the world did this happen in broad daylight? And in our case with my family, through an investigation, it started with the private investigation. What was uncovered is that there were some boxes, the aftermarket boxes that were, a tire boss that was up on the dashboard of these concrete mixer trucks that illegally placed, it blocked the vision on a right-hand turn from the truck driver's perspective looking down. And the private investigator in that particular case this occurred back in Florida. The private investigator there was able to demonstrate they had this installed on hundreds of different trucks. And so we're able to both know why and how it happened, and we're able to affect change, which is a huge thing for a family who's gone through something like this. And I know in cases that we worked with you, we're able to affect change through the work that you're doing. And so can you talk a little bit just about your experience in terms of, what it's like as an investigator to find out those causes and to be able to report those back to the family to help them?
What a wonderful feeling when you can uncover a kernel, a nugget, a piece of data, a little information, maybe just a record or maybe a witness. And you speak to them or you look at the record or you get this nugget and you digest it and you say, oh, this is why that happened. He had been sleeping. That piece of equipment didn't work the way it was supposed to. Something was on the dashboard that shouldn't have been there. He was eating food when he was driving one of those 80,000 trucks that you talk about. And the insight, it's professionally rewarding, Kyle, because at that moment, you can be helpful to someone who comes to you and says, not as you just noted, not what happened, not just what happened, why did this happen? And I have a team of investigators who assist me, Kyle, and I say to all of them, the beginning of your investigation, there's always going to be a question that I can't answer until you help me answer it. And that question is, why did this happen? Why did they not see that traffic light? Why was that person speeding? Why did that truck weigh so much? Why was there so much on the dashboard of that vehicle? Why were the brakes not working? Why didn't the driver know that? There's a cascade of questions like this, and it's rewarding to know that the more of those that you can answer, the greater the likelihood that your client, in this case, the attorneys I work for, are going to be able to hold those responsible for the accident accountable and A, get as much compensation as they can for their client, but B, help the liable parties understand that if they don't fix that, if they don't correct that, if they don't do a better job with hiring drivers or training drivers, then these kind of accidents are going to keep happening. And the chance that the criminal outcome can help achieve that is not nearly as great as the chance that the outcome of the civil action can accomplish that. So, yeah, it's both a combination of helping the injured person and trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again, ever, anywhere, under any circumstances.
And there is this cathartic impact when you're traumatized in terms of a healing aspect of uncovering the truth. And that's got to be so rewarding in your world to be part of the team that is actually finding that kernel and uncovering the truth.
I say to my team that we wear the white hats, Kyle, because we work on behalf of people who have been seriously injured almost always through no fault of their own.
And when you're looking at a case, I'm sure there are also times where you uncover information that may demonstrate there is no case, right? I mean, that does happen when you speak to a group of witnesses. You're out there trying to find the truth, whatever that truth may be, I presume.
Sure. And sometimes some of the cases that come in my door come in from attorneys who haven't yet examined the truth of what their clients have told them. And so in the course of unpeeling that onion, you sometimes learn that people have misrepresented what have occurred, hidden their own liability, culpability for the crash. Sure, we do that as well. And so sometimes that means there is no case, there is no claim. Fortunately, not nearly as often as the instances in which there are liable parties that need to be held to account. I'd just say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're seriously injured, you've got so much you've got to deal with putting your life back together, working with your doctors, trying to keep your loved ones close to you, even though you can't provide and care for them the way you used to. So my single most important piece of advice I have for people who find themselves in this unthinkable position is remember that your single most important job is to take care of number one. You've got to take care of yourself. You need to make sure that you're doing some of the fundamentals like eating and sleeping and taking care of number one, because you can't take care of anyone else unless you take care of number one. And so one of the most important things you can do when you find yourself in that situation is clear the deck. Get things off your desk and off your plate that you can get off by relying on other experts. Make sure that you have a good claims rep at your insurance company. As soon as you can, get a good attorney. If you're not ready to hire an attorney, then at least get a private investigator to find out and document as best as they can what happened. I'm sorry to have to repeat myself, but time is your enemy. And the longer you delay doing those things and getting this off your desk, the harder it's going to be for you to recover, and the harder it is going to be for you to hold those accountable who put you in this position, and they need to be held accountable.
A great point. And just to be clear about something that you said, which is really important, although people many times hire a private investigator through a lawyer, that their lawyer actually retains the investigator because we work in this field and we know who the best investigators are. We know the Ryan Rosses of the world. People can have their own crash investigated on their own, going directly to a private investigator. You're open and available to the public, and so are others, right?
I've done that, yes. And it can help if the injured person or someone in their family is not ready yet to sort through the options for legal assistance. Then I would say to them, okay, if you're not ready for that, I would try to get ready for that as soon as you can, because getting a lawyer as soon as you can is best. But if you're not ready for that, at least get some guidance from me on the kinds of things that you can do yourself to get a hold of the records. You know, Kyle, you've got to get those records as soon as you can, because the ugly truth is someday they won't be available there to anybody, no matter who you hire, no matter what contract you enter into with a lawyer. A lawyer cannot invent a record that's already gone away permanently because it's been destroyed. So please get those records as soon as you can, get the help as soon as you can. If you're determined to do it yourself, okay, get some guidance and get those records before they go away permanently.
And it's not just records, video. In our world today, one of the first things that you guys do is you go out and you look for every source of video that might exist related to an event to see if there's video evidence of what happened. And I think a lot of people are surprised. We see at intersections, we'll see there's cameras. It looks like there's cameras there. And you might expect that the police are looking at all of those cameras, but that's not true either, right? So video is a huge aspect of today's investigative world, isn't it?
Yes, sir, Kyle. And the unfortunate reality is that there's so much video that it cannot all be preserved. The vast majority of video is overwritten within 30 days. So you've got to get your hands on that video within 30 days or forever lose the chance to get it. And of course, as you know from your work, video is so helpful and so valuable because no one's lying in that video. The video doesn't lie. It shows what it shows. And if it shows someone speeding or turning on a red or ignoring the fact that the green arrow has gone off, you want to get that video as soon as you can. It sounds like I'm repeating myself, but that clock is ticking. You've got, in most cases, 30 days. Get it as soon as you can.
So let's talk about one other type of investigation that I think people might overlook in their first thought, and that is if somebody's hit by a drunk driver, the police are looking at whether or not they can convict the driver of a crime who caused the crash of drinking and driving, let's say. But a lot of people don't even know that you can actually, in most states, you can bring a claim, a case against the place that served the alcohol if they knowingly served a visibly intoxicated person. And this is huge because a lot of repeat drunk drivers who are out on the road, guess how much insurance they have? Zero, right? And so a drunk driver hurts or kills your relative, and the police tell you, we got the drunk driver, the guy's going to jail, gal's going to jail, but their insurance, no insurance. And people say, well, I guess there's nothing I can do. Wrong. That's not true. Because it's possible to bring a claim against the server of alcohol, the establishment that served the alcohol. But guess what the police are not asking in many cases?
They don't care what the driver got his alcohol. They don't even ask.
Right. So can you talk about the job that you do when you're contacted and told, we think there's a drunk driver, and how do you help figure this out, and just tell the audience about that?
So sometimes the drunk driver has a receipt in his pocket from the tavern down the block where he'd been drinking. Sometimes he's been communicating, texting, or phoning with his parents or his friends or his sorority buddy, fraternity buddies and sorority friends about where the fun they're having and all the alcohol they're consuming. There is often either a paper trail or chicken drops, chicken feeds, indicating if you follow this path, you might be able to figure out what bar he'd been in. And one reason that's so rewarding, Kyle, is that although most bars take a responsible approach with respect to not over-serving patrons, some are interested only in selling as much booze as they can to as many people as they can. And then they ignore when they've got somebody in their bar who's tipsy, ebullient, laughing, crying, angry, acting very much like a drunk person, and they still give them more alcohol. And then instead of calling them a cab or asking them how they're going to get home, they ignore when this guy gets up, goes into the parking lot, gets into a car, and drives up. So the kinds of cases that you're describing right now are probably, maybe even at least the best, if not the only way to hold bars accountable for over-serving people. And that makes them rewarding for someone in my line of work, valuable for your clients, and valuable to society, Kyle, because those bars need to be reminded. If you overserve, people find themselves in unthinkable positions where people's lives have been ruined, and bars need to be reminded of that.
So what do you do? Let's say you identify the bar. Do you go in the bar? What are you looking for? What evidence can you help uncover? How do you go about doing that as an investigator?
Sure, we'll go into the bar. Number one, we'll look particularly for surveillance cameras, and we'll look for the setup in the bar and talk to the person who was overserved about where he or she had been sitting, whether the bartender was serving them, whether it was a waitress serving them, how many other tables that waitress was paying attention to, how often that waitress came by. Did the waitress ever say, I think you've had enough, I'm cutting you off? Had they ever seen anyone at that bar be cut off? And then there's a paper trail, Kyle. In order to run a bar, you have to get a liquor license, and there's a set of records there that indicate whether that bar has been previously cited for violations of liquor license rules or regulations, either maybe serving a minor or over-serving, and we'll find out whether that bar has been sued in court for over-serving people. These little bits and pieces add up to a story that you can tell, suggesting that this bar is run by irresponsible people who don't care about anything other than squeezing every dime they can of alcohol sales out of their customers. And those bars need to be held accountable.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about, you getting a lead about a bar and then going in and discovering, hey, there's actually surveillance video in here, and being able to go to the lawyer who can then issue you know, a preservation of evidence letter, and now we've secured it, and we've secured that evidence, and that you might see the person. We've seen it. You and I have seen it, where you get a video and you see the person at the bar doing shot after shot after shot, and then walking straight out the door. You can follow it to the parking lot video where they get right into their car and nobody tries to stop them, and clearly they've been overserved. And that makes the difference in those families' lives, because we're able to capitalize on that and make a recovery where the drunk driver may have no insurance.
And that's something that someone involved in the accident isn't thinking of when they're trying to put their life back together after having been injured in a crash caused by a drunk driver.
There's one other aspect, and then we'll close out. But not only car crashes, I know that we have retained you where people are on somebody's property, and maybe it's a commercial property, and there's a very significant fall. Somebody hits their head and they die. They're very badly injured, and we want to know about who the people are who might be responsible for ice removal or snow removal or that aspect. Can you talk about that sort of premise liability investigation and your role in that setting?
Sure. Once again, there's a series of records to be obtained. Often, if someone is injured falling on ice or snow at an apartment complex or a commercial plaza, someone has called 911, and the person who made that call is often in a position to testify about the ice and the fact that no ice was cleared and no ice melt was put down. And then there are the witnesses to interview, both about that incident and often more importantly, Kyle, about what the property owner had done in response to prior complaints about ice not being cleared. What happened with earlier people when they got injured, and did the property manager and owner respond appropriately? And if not, is this an opportunity to hold them accountable? And as you well know, Kyle, sometimes these slips and falls on ice and snow can lead to catastrophic injuries. And where there are property managers who need to be held accountable, this is something else that is a rewarding thing for people in my line of work to do, to hold people like that accountable for not caring about whether anyone gets injured on their property.
And that's a setting, Ryan, where in many cases there is no police investigation to go after. And so the totality of the investigation relies upon the work of a private investigator to develop whether or not there is a dangerous condition on the property, and whether there's a potential claim and against whom the claim can be brought. So that's a big one, right? You guys are pretty much starting with nothing.
Yep. And if we can put something together and that property owner or manager can be held accountable, guess what? From that day on, the minute they sign that check, or their insurance company signs that check to resolve that claim, if they haven't figured it out on their own, their insurance company is going to tell them, hey guys, let's do a better job out there. And if they do a better job, Kyle, that means maybe there'll be fewer accidents down the road, fewer people hurt. And you know what? In a small way, maybe we've contributed to a better society, a more responsible society, where people take more recognition of their own obligations to operate their property in a safe manner.
As just a kind of a closing question, I'd like to ask, based upon your work and everything that you've seen in your career, do you have any thoughts on kind of life lessons or takeaways about how our audience can remain safer in their lives and protect their families better, just based upon what you see kind of repetitively out there that is resulting in people getting harmed?
There is one lesson I'd like to share, Kyle. If you wait until you've been injured to do what's right with respect to those who are seriously injured, you've waited too long. It won't be long into your adult life when the day comes that you see someone else get hurt. Car crash, slip, bitten by a dog, falling off a zip line. There's 101 ways to get seriously hurt. And the sad truth is that some people, when they see something like that happen, are too willing and too anxious to drive on because they've got an appointment. They've got to get their daughter to their swim lessons. They've got to get to their job. And my plea of everyone in your audience is, when that happens, when you see someone else get hurt, please recognize that it's not just the right thing to do to help the person who's been hurt by passing out your name, making sure people know how to get a hold of you, but speaking to the police officer, by making sure that the injured person knows who you are. But if you do the right thing, then you do earn, I believe in it, karma, Kyle, and the day will come when you will have the chance to cash that karma because you're going to be the victim of an accident like that. So I just want to remind people, when you see something happen in which someone's been injured, slow down, take your time, pull over if you can. It's not just calling 911. It's recognizing that if you can put your life on hold for just a little bit, then you can do something so valuable, so meaningful to the person who's been injured. And then the day comes when you're going to be injured yourself and you're going to benefit from the fact that you took care of that other person. Maybe someone will be there to take care of you. And as a community and as a society, everybody will benefit.
Well, that's really a great parting words. I really appreciate it. And you're right. For so much of what you do and for the people that we represent, if there aren't witnesses, especially in death cases, if the person who was hurt is not here to tell us what happened, we rely upon everybody around us to help do the right thing. So just great words, man. I really, really appreciate you being a guest today. I know you're very busy. I got to tell you, just really fascinating information, and thank you so much. And to the audience, thank you for listening. I hope that today you've learned again some important and valuable information, both about what happens behind the scenes and how important it is to conduct a complete investigation when bad things happen to good people. And I hope you also learned some life lessons that you can take back in your own life, in your own world. Really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.
You've been tuning into the Unthinkable podcast with your host, Kyle Bachus. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, kylebachus.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.